We're here today to listen, ask questions, interrogate. John Sweet, who's Coos County Commissioner.
So I really want to avoid, the question was, what does the state do for the county? And we're a part of the state. A more appropriate question might have been, what does the state do to the county? You sometimes say, but not really. But I have something I think that's more pressing than that I want to talk about. I want to talk about today, and I want to hear from you on this, because we have to have some new sources of revenue with which to fund local governments. A prime example, and this is one that the state has come to the rescue of. As you would remember, local schools used to be locally funded. That meant that they received, if they lived off of local property taxes and their share of the harvest proceeds from largely federal and sometimes state forests. But we all know that, well, the state recognized that those sources of funding were not providing adequate revenue to our school system, K through 12 and junior college, to adequately educate our children. So they created a statewide school equalization program, which backfills the school systems or the school districts that don't get enough revenue, and this is a simplification, to be able to provide $12,000 per year per student for all the kids. And if they fall below that mark, then the state assists. It more than assists, it seems to dominate. That program has turned into a $5 billion a year, actually about $5.6 billion a year. So the state has recognized that local sources of funds are not adequately funding at least the school systems. You sometimes have to wonder why then not the district attorney's office or jails, or what else could they help us with? Well, they have their own funding problems, and I'm not sure we really want to be dependent on them anyway. But before I get into funding local government, I think the first thing, one of the first questions will be, well, are these local governments being efficiently run? I cannot answer for all of the local governmental institutions, but I can answer on behalf of the county. I think there's always a suspicion that there's a lot of waste and a lot of things that don't need to be done, being done by local governments. When I came here in 13 years, I was going to do this for a couple of years. Someone said, John, you got to throw your hat in the ring. Two of the commissioners died, and they're going to appoint 2 commissioners. Why don't you do that? There's nothing, I can't imagine anything further from what I ever thought I would be doing than that. And I first said no, then I said, well, yes. And then I didn't get appointed. And that, can't use bad words. That upset me. And so I ran, and then I won. And then I ran again, and won again, and again. So, yeah. It's been 13 years. Next year will be the 14th. When I came here, Coos County was one of a small handful of counties that had been identified by the state as not likely to succeed. In other words, they were going to fail financially. Within a year, we had Coos County off of that list. So, now, I'm like the word "we." I didn't do that. We did it as a team. Took a lot of work. We reduced taxes. That, but not all your taxes, just the ones which we controlled, which are the taxes that go to the county. We reduced them by 1/3. Today they're 2/3 of what they were 12 years ago. It used to be $1.58 per $1,000 of taxable value. Now it's $1.08. That's efficiency. We had probably, I can't remember the number, a lot of debt, probably around $10 million of debt. Today we have no debt. We are absolutely debt-free. We had $8 million of, what do you call them? There's a phrase for it. But it's things that you're supposed to do that you haven't done. And the state, it had to do with landfills that we had not closed. And the state estimated it was going to cost $8 million to close them until we had $8 million in our savings account. They were always after us. We don't have that. We have a little bit, but we've also increased the efficiency of the solid waste department. And so they're self-funding, including that requirement. Part of this happened after I came, but most of it happened before I came. Wasn't too many years ago, the county had 550 employees. At the beginning of last year, we had 350. Now we have about 330. We've had to lay people off. Our county tax rate is the second lowest of all the counties in the state. Only Curry County has a lower tax rate than we have. And we're not lower by just a little tiny bit. We're lower by 2/3. Our rate is $1.08. If you add it up, each county's permanent rate, their local option rate, and their bond rate, it would come to about $3.52 per thousand. We're at $1.08. So we run pretty efficiently. I mean, we've made good use of the taxpayers' dollars. We reduced our taxes. So it would be hard to say that the problem the county has with finances is that you run a bad ship over there. I don't think we do. Now let's take a look at revenues. We know that at one time we had a lot of timber harvest revenues from the federal forest and from some of the state forests. Those are reduced dramatically. Keep in mind, we didn't do that. Somebody else did that to us for reasons that, many people's minds were good, but nonetheless, something that was being done to us externally. Let's look at the private forests. We used to have, it was typical that trees or timber under state Oregon law are considered real property. And they once were taxed in the same way your house is taxed. You paid on a part of the value of the standing timber. That didn't work out too well because once a forest was burned or harvested, the owner didn't have any money, any flow of money coming in, and yet the taxes persisted. And so they were turning their timberlands back to the counties in big gobs, and the counties couldn't afford to do anything with them, and so they were not being reforested. So they changed that method of taxation to what they call a severance tax. So you didn't pay taxes on your trees while they were growing, but when you cut the tax, a percentage of the stumpage, that's what you get per dollar or per tree based on its volume. They call it stumpage. You paid a percentage of your stumpage. So if you got $500 1,000 for your trees, you gave a percentage of that. It went to the state, but they in turn sent it back to the counties. And the counties distributed it the same way it would have been distributed had the tree been taxed on the basis of a standing value. That went on for a while, and then the state, under pressure from the forest companies, terminated the severance tax. So they gave back to the timber companies what had been a huge source of revenue to a lot of the local or the smaller timbered counties. So I don't know what that ran in dollars. I know today it would be probably $5 or $6 million a year. That's kind of a guess. And then we, the people, decided we were paying too much in property taxes, and probably we were. And they passed measures 5 and 50, which reduced the amount. Well, first it said, whatever rate you have now, or whatever, the only rate that really makes a difference is called the permanent rate. And that's the rate that is in place, you have in place. If you're a school district and it was 5%, that was your rate per dollar, $5 per dollar or per $1,000 assessed value, that was the rate. In the county, we had a very low rate because we were getting so much money in from federal timber. We didn't need to charge our citizens very much. So the rate got locked down to $1.08, and the timber revenues disappeared, and then the severance tax disappeared. So now we are being charged, instead of a property tax based on the market value of property, thank heavens we're not. It's grown to the point that it's about half of the value of, we pay taxes on about half the value of the property. Now, it varies by ownership, but countywide, statewide, it's about 52%. So if you had a home that, I'll make it simple to keep the math right, $1 million home, and you've been living here for the 30 years since property measures 5 and 50 were instituted, you would be paying property taxes based on half of the home's market value. So that limits our growth in taxes. They can only grow 3% a year, and that does not keep up with the cost of doing business. We were able to hold our noses above water up until the time COVID came, and then we started feeding all this new money into the system, and inflation went wild. And so you can see there were about 2-3 years where inflation increased 10 to 15%. And we were limited to 3% increase in our revenues. So, and of course jobs for people were being offered more because of inflation. And so if we wanted to keep our people, we had to meet the competition. And we did. But it drove up the price of our compensation. Our alternative was not good. And no one ever, and we tried 3 times to get ballot measure passed, 3 times it lost. So last December, we laid off, I think, about 20 people. And the 1st of July, we laid off 10 people. And we still were drawing down reserves, we didn't cut deeply enough. And we're going to be right there again, come budget year. So until we find some new sources of revenue, I think this is going to be the story. There's no way, I don't think, to tinker with measures 5 and 50. Oh, another thing about measures 5 and 50. As I said, it limits the growth of taxes on your property. So I gave the example, well, I'll use my house. It has a $700,000 market value. I pay taxes on $369,000. Now, I thought, when I pass away and that house goes to my children, that it would then go back up to the market. It does in most states, but not in our state. It stays at the lower value. And already, since 30 years since those two measures took effect, as I said, the spread has become about 50%, taxable value 50% higher, lower than the market value. What's going to happen in the next 30 years? So I don't see getting this fixed. No one's going to vote for higher property taxes. And not enough people will, at least. So my question to you is, where do we go from here? And I think the first question is, we need to find, my answer is, we need to find a new source or new sources of revenue for local governments, like cities, like counties, like school districts, like ports, and airports, and hospitals. Our property tax system, really, it's a one-legged stool, and that leg is halfway broken off. So what do we do? Don't expect the citizens to change anything much in terms of wanting that. But whatever we should do, in my mind, it should be a diversification, so that we're not looking at just a one revenue flow. It should be something that keeps up with inflation. Those are two things that come to mind. But what will that be is a tougher question. And I'll give you some suggestions that I'd like you to think about. And keep in mind that your first reaction, everyone's first reaction will be to say, oh no, not that. So, but we have to have something, or we won't have jails, and we won't have hospitals, and we won't have ports or airports. So it'll be tough. One thing that I haven't thought is I've done some research, and although it was the state that imposed the severance tax on timber, I think that a county could do that on their own, and each county could decide whether they wanted to have a severance tax or not. So that's one possibility. Commissioner Farmer has suggested that perhaps the state should give back to each county 5% of the income taxes that come from a county. It's going to be hard to get the state to give us money. It's going to be hard to figure out what part of the money that Walmart, for example, makes in the state came from Coos County, or Roseburg Forest Products with mills around the state, what part. So it's not impossible, but hard to do. Maybe a sales tax, maybe a local sales tax, or maybe a very, very small state-sponsored sales tax, the entire proceeds of which would go back to the counties in which the sales tax was realized. And that begins to make sense because it broadens your tax base. It's not dependent upon the state's general fund, and it grows with inflation. So, take it from there. And if you don't have ideas for this, ask other questions, because I don't know the ideas, but I need your ideas. And sometimes you get so close to a problem, you don't think out of the box very well. So looking outside is a good idea.